Welcome to the Dean's Corner. Today we have two very special guests and our alumni here with us this morning in the School of Education. We have Stuart, Chen Hayes, and we also have his husband, Lance Chen Hayes. And so we're just fortunate to have our alumni who comes back to share with us all the things that they're doing in the world. This morning we're also sharing their latest book, Double Dads, One Teen, A Queer Family's Trailblazing Life in the U.S. and Taiwan. So, welcome.
Thank you.
So, how did this book and this life come about?
Well, the book was the result of the first time that actually we were on sabbatical together in 2007 in Taiwan. Our now good friend at the time, the chair of the School of Education at Taiwan's oldest school of ed, which is National Zhonghua University of Education, had invited us on sabbatical. We had done a workshop for her a year before. It had gone really well. We had done a workshop on unlearning oppression. One of her graduate students, an out gay man, had seen that we were going on vacation through an article that was in Counseling Today, the American Counseling Association trade newspaper.
Yes.
So he contacted us and said, hey, would you come do a guest lecture? I'm like, no, I'm on vacation. Why would I do that? And he said no, and he was very persistent. I said, well, where's Zhonghua? He said, it's 10 minutes from Taichung. I'm like, well, I can do that. That's right where we're going to be. So he came and did that, and I had shared with her that I was on sabbatical the next year. Would she be interested? She's like, sure, this would be great. So she got a Taiwan National Academia Sinica Foundation scholarship to actually be able to bring us both in. So the two of us, as far as we know, were the only gay couple that has ever taught a course in anywhere in Asia, let alone we were teaching Taiwan's first master's level sexuality counseling course. And then the doctoral students got me alone. We were thinking the master's students' English would be worse. It was the reverse. The doctoral students struggled more, but we did fine. And so we co-taught. It's one and only time we've taught a sexuality counseling course. Lance has a doctorate in physical therapy, and mine in counselor ed. And so we've done all sorts of workshops and training together, and it was magical because we should learn sexuality in our original language because of the emotion or whatever. So we did it bilingually in Mandarin and English, and it was really special. So during the course of the sabbatical, Dr. Sharon Chow said, you know, I have this amazing story. You should write it up. Like, Stuart, you're on sabbatical. So I did. So the first half of the book was done 12 years ago, and we actually had a publisher who looked at it in Taiwan, and like, in the end, they said, well, get it published in English first, and then we'll take it as a translation. So 12 years later, I just kept adding more and more stories. And then we went back about 2 years ago, and the man who had reviewed the book originally, an out gay man, is now a professor in Taiwan, and he and his husband have a small publishing business, and they said they would contract to do the book as a translation. So that sounded great, and along the way, then this publisher, Dio Press Incorporated, came along, and I had an offer to do it in English. And I contacted and said, would this be fine? Absolutely. So this one came a year ago, November, and it was out in March. And then the gay men who run an academic press had shopped the Mandarin version to a corporate publisher, and that one now has the book, and they're doing like final comments on it, but we hope that it will be out in time for Taiwan Gay Pride in October, and so that's how we ended up with two. And that book, actually, this one I'm the solo author, and Lance is the lead author on the other because it's in Mandarin, and my Mandarin is pretty limited, and this one is exquisite. So. And that publisher asked for Lance to redo it from Lance's voice so that it would be much more accessible for Mandarin and Taiwanese readers. So that's how the book came about.
So why is this important?
The experiences that we've had are really pretty unique, and at the same time, we think there's a lot of universality in them as well. So Lance is Taiwan's first out gay father. We are teen, came out at age 3 as gay, and then again came out in 9th grade as both pansexual and non-binary. And so a lot of people can learn a lot from the adventures that we've had on two continents, both in Taiwan and the US. Kalani Artin is now the first Taiwan citizen to have both two dads' names on a USA birth certificate and a USA marriage license. And so we just kind of lived our lives, but along the way, once the media in Taiwan found out about Lance and found out about us, constant newspaper interviews, TV interviews, were recognized on the street, media clips, and now with the books as well. And so we both are activists. We didn't really plan on being family activists, but we've been queer activists, and the two have really melded, and then our work in the US as well. So we at first were very quiet, didn't share anything with anyone, but we became bolder as we felt that we were safe enough and we had enough legal protections in the US that we could start to share these stories. And so I think for lots of folks, there's a lot to learn. We know the research shows that actually being gay parents, that our kids are more likely to turn out progressive, more comfortable with gender fluidity. There are a lot of things that now the research confirms about. There's so much that we have to share and be able to do.
So Lance, how does this affect you when you go home or you go back to Taiwan, and how has that changed people's perception there?
I always believe in the power of narrative storytelling. So just by chance, because I've been out to my family for a long time before the gay rights movement started in Taiwan, and so I've been very comfortable being open and out. So by chance, I started getting interviewed by Chinese media in New York, in the US. And then through connection, the media found out about my story and they wanted to interview me in Taiwan. So our story has been out in Taiwan for a while. That's why I became the first out gay dad in Taiwan. So to me, it's really about using storytelling to educate people, to advocate gay rights, about LGBTQ issues. And to me, that's a very natural transition, progression, how everything comes about. And so the book sort of accumulated all our journeys together. And another perspective I want to add on is more universal, is that I remember one time when we're sharing our story and one person commented on that person felt that our life is full of intentionality. And that phrase, that term just stays with me. And to me, it's about living our life with intention and really doing our best to live our life, to advocate and to fight for our rights. And that is the universal theme that I think people can retake from our stories.
That's beautiful. So let's go back a couple of years.
A couple.
Yes. So how did you guys run into each other? How did you meet? How did this all start?
So I'll start and you'll finish.
Okay.
We were both in Chicago. Lance had come to New York City to study graduate work in physical therapy, and I'm from the Chicago suburbs, and I had taken my first faculty position in Chicago at that time. It was the wrong fit, but Lance was the right fit, so all was not lost. About a year into it, we were using personal ads. This was the Stone Age, before hookup apps and those types of things. So at the time, it was a Chicago arts paper, which is still going strong, called The Reader. And you had put in a personal ad, and I responded. And not only did you have to write an ad and get a response, but the response was done over the phone. So I had to leave a voicemail message. So Lance got to hear my voice. And what happened after that?
And that's the first weekend after I placed the ad. And I have friends visiting me from New York because I used to live in New York. So all three of us just sitting down there, I told them about I had this personal ad and let's play all the messages together and through the speakerphone, and then we can vote together.
Yes.
And guess who won the vote?
It's like Drag Race without the drag queen.
And so
that's fun. Yeah, that's how
So
we
we
met.
talked every night on the phone for a week, and then
Yeah.
the first date was in Sub-Zero, January cold, January 22nd, 1995, and we have been together ever since.
Sure.
So we are in year 26.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Now, I know that you also have a documentary. We saw the pre-screening last night, and this will be featured today at noon. So how did the movie come about, or the documentary come about, and what would you like people to know about it, or why they should see it?
Where do I start? Well, yeah, this is working well. So about 10 years ago, a good friend of ours who is the documentarian, Professor Larry Tung, he's also faculty at City University of New York on a different campus, had approached us about doing a documentary for a very close friend of ours, Dr. Pauline Park. We all met in Chicago. She moved to New York first, and then we followed soon after. She's one of the country's foremost transgender rights activists, and we've done a lot of work with her in Chicago and then in New York as well. And we were like, sure, this is great. So he asked us to do a cameo, and we talked about Pauline, and we had at the time our 2-year-old stole the entire film, was dancing on both of our laps the entire time. So no one hears a word we say, we just watches Kalani being really funny. So that was a decade ago, and then we ran into Larry probably 4 years ago at another documentary. He's a very busy filmmaker, and we'd seen Pauline. He said, I haven't seen you in ages. He said, has anyone, done your story? And we're like, well, yeah, we're all over the media stuff. No one's done an official documentary. He's like, I want to do it.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So the filming went for about 3 years, and a lot of it was filmed. You'll see our teen is now 16 and a half and 6'4" with a booming bass voice.
Yes.
But our teen in the film is 14 and has a more gentle voice and is comparatively short. So that piece is took a while. But that's how the filming was in Taiwan, all over the U.S., and that's how it came together.
And Larry has shown the documentary in several different festivals, and
South Africa, Italy, a bunch in the U.S., and it started in Chennai, India. So I guess
Wonderful.
we've been
That's
around.
absolutely wonderful.
right. So it's really to actually it's very interesting because Larry talked about he had a hard time trying to really edit it into a story, and eventually he has decided to edit in a way it's kind of similar to the title of our book. It's called Double Dad and One Queer Teen of Rainbow Family.
Yes.
So it's just to showcase like a snapshot of our family story and how our family came about. It's a good introduction, and I think it's also a very good film to really as a conversation starter for people to think about what gay family is about, how family is about, and to really think about several issues that we try to bring to the table.
That's wonderful.
I want to add one more piece. I think it's the role of our sisters in the development of our family.
Yes.
And so both of our sisters play a very prominent role. And Lance from a family of 9 with 2 sisters. I'm from a family of 2. Out of the blue, my sister, and I'm wearing blue, what do you know, volunteered to be our surrogate.
Yes.
And so that's how we got our child, Kalani. And so the film really centers around not just us and Kalani, but our 2 sisters, because your sister, right, she was the first you came out to, and my sister talks a lot about why she chose to be our surrogate and the process and all. And so I think it's not only celebrating queer family and what we've done in terms of with Kalani, but it's celebrating the heterosexual sisters and their extraordinary support and love that have given us this amazing.
I hear another book, I think it's My Sisters and Gay Brothers.
There you go.
Sisters are so important in who we become, aren't they? Yeah. So I love the fact that you take your life story and being who you are and putting it into place and situating it in also an academic, educational way while being activists. So in a way, what you guys are also doing is giving us a model for how some academics can live out their lives and be who they are. Mm-hmm. So can you talk about how that has,
Sure.
What you're doing has changed what we do in education from a school, teacher, parent standpoint, but as well as, both of you're an academician, you're a professor at Lehman, right? Mm-hmm. And so how does this find its way into your work, into the classroom,
Sure.
and changing the world?
Sure. So again, why don't I start the academic piece, and then we can go to all the activism that we've done in terms of parents.
Sure.
This is working very well.
Yeah.
So, and Lance has a doctorate, and certainly one of the things we talked about was we enjoy that one of us is a doctorate outside of academia and another one who's in, so that's been good for work-life, family balance. So, as a professor now in my 28th year, my 23rd year at CUNY's Lehman College in the Bronx, I've always been an activist, and so even as junior untenured, I was like, I'm still going to be an activist. And so almost all of my writing is conceptual, and almost all of it is rooted within an activist paradigm. I co-founded Counselors for Social Justice within the American Counseling Association, and my original research was on counselor educators' perceptions of our multicultural awareness, knowledge, and skills. Mm-hmm. And so when I did my doctorate at Kent State, although my undergrad and my master's in counseling here at IU, I went specifically to work with two extraordinary women of color. I wanted to be pushed to my racism. I wanted to really learn the things that I needed to learn to be more effective. Mm-hmm. And so I have always been supported and celebrated in my academic career as an out queer person, as a person who's really fighting for equity and justice. My first position was at an institution that was quite conservative, and there was definitely some institutional heterosexism that I encountered, but I was like, I don't care, I'm still going to be me. Yes. But I knew I needed change. Now in a public school with a very strong union in New York City, although the Bronx is fairly conservative, I teach the country's only sexuality counseling course specific to school counselors, and almost all of my students are first-gen Latinx women of color, and so we have multiple intersections around identities, and so I use readings that are rooted within Latin American young adult novels, picture books. I mean, I really try to pick things that look at multiple identities. I teach our leadership, advocacy, consultation, and collaboration in schools class, and so I teach Diane Ravitch, her new book, Slaying Goliath, all about challenging privatization. I'm teaching Red State Revolt, which is all about the teacher strikes in red states that conservative women who voted for Trump rebelled and said, we're going after these politicians who are just killing the teaching profession. And so I think part of it is that I have been given a voice. I feel that most of us in academia are often good at doing activism within our disciplines, but I'm all over Twitter, and so folks have found me all over the world. I've befriended Sarah Goja-Grab, who has done extraordinary work on food and housing insecurity, shown that now 1 out of every 2 undergrads in the US is food or housing insecure. We found each other on Twitter, so I teach her book and her research. I've now joined her advisory board in terms of the Hope Center for College, Career, and Community. And I have a long student affairs background that all came from here from IU as an RA, as an assistant hall director. And so I've been really interested in student affairs. At the time was probably the most activist group on campus when I was here. And so I've really tried to bring that into counselor ed, into school counseling, into my own writing, my own work. And I have a bunch of activists now. I have a student who now comes back and teaches, who led the rank and file caucus to run for president. He didn't get it, but I have landed in a community of activists, and I feel I create the next generation. I think academics need to be doing that, needing to be out of the ivory tower, in the streets, and we've been doing that all along as a couple. So I'll segue over to the parenting side of this.
It's not talking about cliche, but we believe that everything personal is political. Yes. And we have a very similar value system. That's why I've been together for so long, because we're able to really share our value and work together, because we both are believers of social justice. And that's what we do in our life as well, in our personal lives. And so when we have Kalani, and we realized actually being gay parents, there's so much to do in the world because at that time gay parenting wasn't that popular.
Yeah.
And so we
Especially
had,
as gay dad.
as gay dads.
Lesbians, as usual, had taken the lead, and
Right.
we were late to the party, but we're making up for it.
So we had to really blaze our trail, to quote the book,
Yes.
to really advocate for our rights.
Right.
Because we believe that we deserve to have equal rights
Yes.
on everything,
Yes.
every aspect of our lives. And so we try to, starting from pediatrician, daycare, preschool, all the schools that Kalani went to, we were we're out there to interview, to advocate, to educate. And that's how we started out with our personal journey, with our personal life, to really advocate for our rights. And that also leads to my current advocacy work. And I'm working with PFLAG New York City right now. PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Gays and Lesbians and LGBTQ, the whole spectrum right now. And and I focus more on the API, Asian Pacific Islander, Rainbow Parents, that group, because talking about intersectionality, when you talk about being Asian and having children, LGBTQ children, it's an intersection that we have to deal with the cultural barrier and language barrier, and how we can help parents to really accept their children, LGBTQ children, and also become activists, advocates themselves as well. So that's the part I'm working, and because I figure I can really bridge the gap, not the gap. I'm playing the double role because I myself is gay identify, and we have a queer child, so I can really play the role to having the knowledge of how to teach people about the experience of being a gay person, also the experience of raising a queer child in a very positive environment, and how that impacts the child's life.
That's beautiful. So for some of our viewers, you know, they may be very confused with the term binary or gay and queer. For some, calling someone queer years ago was awful.
Yeah.
So could you just give us a rundown of how you define these, so our viewers could become more knowledgeable about how to use these terms? So you use non-binary, queer, transgender, transsexual. Could you just do a brief introduction from how you use those terms?
Shall we alternate again?
Sure, go ahead. 101.
So the important piece of this is that language is always changing.
Yes.
And in the U.S., the terms in English have shifted over time, but other cultures, other languages, it isn't necessarily the same around the world. So that's the number one.
Yes.
So traditionally, most folks know heterosexual, and some folks may not know that the term homosexual is actually really offensive because it implies illness or sin or sickness or deviance.
Okay.
So in the 60s and 70s, folks in the US said, we want to be called gay because gay is good, gay is happy. And then that was a bunch of mostly white men deciding that. The women and lesbians are like, no, we are not under the male umbrella. We want to use lesbian, from the Isle of Lesbos, the Greeks. And then actually bisexuals were actually named through a medical whatever, it wasn't self-determined. So there are some bi folks who are like, I don't identify with that at all because that's a medical model similar to homosexual. So gay and lesbian, and then bi folks were like, we need to be part of this, so it became GLB. And then as the gender expression and identity movement developed, the T came about, transgender as a large umbrella, but trans folks, like bi folks for years, were really not included in the larger gay and lesbian movements or a lot of this. So that was more traditional language until about 15 years ago, and then folks decided to reclaim the words queer, and I'll move to queer and trans and shift along.
And I think
non-binary.
Talking about 101, it's important to really talk about these two very distinctive concepts. One is gender identity, the other one is sexual orientation. Because a lot of people get both confused. So when we talk about sexual orientation, we're talking about who you're attracted to. So being gay, being lesbian, being bisexual, being pansexual is part of your sexual orientation.
Yeah.
And gender identity is how you feel about yourself inside. And so gender identity includes cisgender, meaning your the gender, the sex you're assigned at birth matches your gender identity, then you're cisgender. And transgender is someone whose gender identity doesn't match what the gender they're assigned with at birth. So that's transgender. Transgender is a very umbrella term.
Yes.
And then non-binary is really break down this dichotomy of male and female, because a lot of people really feel that they're somewhere in between. So when you don't believe in the binary genders, and a lot of people start to claim they're non-binary, including some very popular celebrities like Sam Smith,
Yes.
Janelle Monáe.
Yes.
They start to use the non-binary term to help people understand much better. So that can also help explain about pansexual, because when we used to believe in binary, male and female, that's why the sexual orientation part, we talk about bisexual, meaning you're attracted to both female and male.
Sure.
But when you believe in multiple genders, the non-binary, there are so many different genders,
Yes, yes.
and so if you're able to, when you're attracted to multiple genders, you can call yourself pansexual. And that's the difference between pansexual and bisexual.
Thank you so much. So, what would you like to say to parents who may be struggling with a child that does not fit the binary, male or female, or is playing with the idea that they may want to be something else? I mean, what words of comfort would you give to parents to help them understand?
Well, I think number one is you're not alone.
Okay.
And so there are lots of parents who, we go into parenting with a lot of assumptions and a lot of values and beliefs, and a lot of us have very strong hopes and dreams and expectations for who our children, adolescents, and young adults will turn out to be. And parenting is the world's most humbling experience, because we don't necessarily get what we expect nor what we want. And so the key is being able to let some of that go and allow our children and adolescents to be who they're supposed to be. It helps if you have a somewhat flexible belief system. The parents that tend to be the most challenged are those who come from more inflexible belief systems. So if you're in a more traditional culture or a more traditional religious background, this can be really extra challenging. So the good news is that there are lots of resources that are out. And let's talked about PFLAG, which is amazing, chapters all over. Our other favorite is a group called the Family Acceptance Project, and this is the work of our dear friend and colleague, Dr. Caitlin Ryan, who's this amazing social worker, and she has now worked in multiple conservative religious and political cultures to develop with her research team 100 accepting behaviors that family members can do for LGBTQ, queer and trans youth, and 100 rejecting behaviors that don't work. And so her materials are in Mandarin, they're in Spanish, they're in English. She's worked in traditional Christian communities and Mormon communities, and has all sorts of free resources on her website in multiple languages, familyacceptanceproject.org. And so a lot of traditional families think that the best way to hold on to our values is to push that child or adolescent out of the nest. I'm going to love you by saying, you're going against everything I believe, you leave the house. This is the greatest love that I can do. And paradoxically, what the research shows is that's actually the worst thing we can do. So what we want to do is allow people to hold on to their belief system, their value system, their traditions, their culture, their religion, and simply add the component about you don't ever want to release or lose your child. And what you can do is you can be both and. You can have the beliefs, the values, the religion, and you can love your kid for all of whom they are. And so her research is so groundbreaking, so important, because it gives traditional parents a place to breathe and be all of whom they are, and simply add one more piece, keep the kid whole. What we know is that when families reject, the children and youth are much more likely to potentially commit suicide, much more likely to be homeless, much more likely to be using alcohol or other drugs, much more likely to encounter anxiety and depression. So as mental health counselors, as specialists, the way to prevent that is helping families to keep their kids, to hold on to them.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
I work with a lot of parents, so a lot of times I tell them, I know you love your children. And so it's important to know that what's the best way to express your love, especially to children who identify as LGBTQ. And the best way to express your love is to provide support and to understand your what you don't know, and to learn and to really accept, because children should be in a supportive environment to explore, to really understand who they are, and especially when they go through the teenage process, there's a lot of explanation, and it doesn't mean they decide they want to try out different things before they really understand who they are, and they should have the freedom, the space, the safe space to be able to explore and to really know who they are, and so that's the best way for parents to support their children.
Okay. I have two more questions. I know we're coming down to the end of the interview, but the first one is, what else would you say to those teachers who may not be in New York City or San Francisco or LA, who may have to deal with loving a kid who may not fit in a box?
Thank goodness for the internet. Thank goodness for Skype. Thank goodness for our phones, because anyone, anywhere can connect immediately with resources. And what we need to see is there are allies in all communities. So my dad is from rural Terre Haute. He was born in Blandford and grew up in Bicknell. So there are allies in Blandford and Bicknell. There may not be a lot, but they do exist. And so it's learning to find your resources. So the unions, both NEA and AFT, have wonderful LGBTQ and ally groups. We talked about PFLAG, family acceptance. Folks could contact us at any point in time. It's their resource. And here at IU, I mean, I came here because of the Kinsey Institute. I wasn't ready to come out in undergrad, but my master's advisor in counseling counselor ed was the former research psychologist, Alan Bell. And taking Alan's sexuality counseling class in the SAR completely changed my life. It allowed me to walk out of the closet that same semester. I mean, my family wouldn't exist if it wasn't for having the chance. It didn't hurt that my mom did her doctorate here as well. But IU has always been a place where we were just talking about, we were in the union, and there were so many clearly, I'd made a comment about drag queens, and right away this clearly gay man came up and helped us. It was just really fun. And so I talked about, even between the 80s and now, there's a very different, even more welcoming presence.
Talking about the resources on the internet, because they're also like welcoming schools or safe schools, a lot of resources on the internet. So there are curriculum right there, so teachers can really access and to learn about them.
GLSEN is the other major one, which used to be gay, lesbian, straight, but now is everybody, and has done lots of research. Those are the main.
You talk so much about Kalani, their son. So in the voice and mind of Kalani, if he had to talk about the world 20 years from now, how do you think he would like to see the world?
Well, Kalani is an artist and a sculptor. That's part of why they're not with us. They're taking sculpture classes last night at New York Artists League. And so we're pretty verbal. Kalani is less verbal. Kalani uses images. And so I think what Kalani would say is, I dream of a world where I don't have to come out. I don't have to use any labels. I can simply be. And so, but also as a mixed race person, Kalani is aware that he's had a different experience of racism than someone who's monoracial, as a person of color, as a white person. So is aware of those multiple cultural identities, but I think wants a place where folks can just be and enjoy and kind of say, well, I'm not the kind of activist like my dad's, but Kalani is teaching a queer theory class to high school students and has found, I think, their way to be in activism. It's more through images, more through crafting art, and we're firm believers that the world doesn't have enough artists, so I think that's Kalani's vision.
So, again, the book is Double Dads, One Teen. And also look online for the documentary, and I would let you talk a little bit about where to order the book from
Absolutely.
and how to get access to the film.
Absolutely. So at this point, the film is going to be trickier. You can go to Professor Larry Tung, larrytung.com. I assume he will eventually put it online, but it's still being screened at film festivals, so that won't happen at this point in time.
Yes.
Larry Tung, T-U-N-G, and so that eventually he will put it online for the world to see, but
Okay.
has to go through the film festivals before.
And
So
how
at
would
some
they
point-
order the book?
Right. The book you can get from any major, I recommend Powell's online because it's independent. There's some other ones that are a bit more in terms of, I won't name the name, but you can get it through that too. But you can get it for 30% off until the middle of March from the publisher, which is Dio Press Incorporated, DIO, which is this new social justice publisher based in New York City, a mile from where I work. So, and it's all about promoting activists and social justice and education titles. And this was one of the first four or five.
Well, I'm so glad that you came home to Indiana University at Bloomington, and we're so proud of you as a School of Ed alumni. And I bid you so much luck with all of this in Kalani. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been our pleasure, and as I shared with Lance, this feels much more like home to me than where I grew up. So, sorry, suburban Chicago. I'll take Bloomington instead. Thank you for your warmth and graciousness. It's been really fun.